and welcome to part 2 of our IP networking webinar. We're glad you're here. I'm your host, Rory O'Shea. Now, in part 1, we talked about mid-market organizations and their increasingly complex networking needs. In part 2, we'll dive more deeply into the concept and realities of public-private cloud computing and the network functions that underpin it. In the last few years, organizations have increasingly begun exploring the management and cost efficiencies offered by public cloud services. However, the speed, reliability, and security inherent to public transport has limited this exploration. With recent developments in IP networking, we're seeing an end to these limitations. And these aren't just enterprise solutions we're talking about. The closer we get to fully virtualized computing environments, the more affordable these solutions become to the lower end of the market. Our panel is here again, bringing its unique industry perspective to bear on the future of IP networking and the business implications, applications, and opportunities it holds. Allow me to introduce David Senf, IDC Canada's Research Director for Infrastructure Solutions and a leading IT security analyst. And Mike Lapalme, Allstream's Director of Managed IP Services. Welcome back, David and Mike. Over the course of our webinar, I'll ask our panelists a number of questions, then we'll address any questions you may have. Now, don't feel you have to wait to ask. If, in fact, a question comes to mind at any point during our conversation, simply type it into the text box at the bottom of your video console. We'll be sure to review it during our Q&A period. Okay then, organizations of all kinds are talking about private and public cloud computing. It seems like several interactive paradigms can be implemented depending on needs, capacity, costs, and resources, among other considerations. So let's start off with you, Mike. Help me understand the framework behind these solutions and why organizations are testing them out.
Sure, and I think you've alluded to it in your introductory notes and what you just said. There's first paradigm we should be aware of, and we'll talk about it here as we move forward. There's the concept of the private cloud and the public cloud, but there's also this concept of the hybrid cloud. It complicates things, but it opens up an infinite amount of possibility for business. So that's the first concept. And the second concept is really, what the cloud enables. It enables customer the ability, or a company the ability, to experience technology as a service, whether it's at an infrastructural layer or we move up in a stack model to a platform. So infrastructure as a service, a platform as a service, or software application as a service. Those two concepts, I think, are key. And to keep it simple for the discussion, the stack model is what I like to use, and that is simply thinking about network, infrastructure, and then application. That's probably the simplest concept for the viewers to get their heads around right now, to think about cloud. And then we can delve down into public, private, and hybrid and what that means.
Okay, David, is there any research that you can provide as far as the adoption around both private and public cloud computing today and for the upcoming years? What does IDC see?
Right, so in public cloud, we're seeing that you need to break that down, as you were saying as well, between software as a service and platform as a service and infrastructure as a service, where software as a service is being led by email. Email is the top application that organizations are signing up for, saying, well, why should I be doing this inside? Why aren't I signing up for an external provider? And that's about a quarter of organizations who are doing that today in a fast-growing area. If you look at things that you hear a lot about, like CRM, so Salesforce.com, those types of things, ERP, what have you, and you add all that up, you get up to over 80% of organizations who are using a paid or an unpaid cloud service. Now, we can also look at platform as a service. About 23% of Canadian organizations using platform as a service, where that includes spinning up a dev and test workload online using a database. But I think the reason that number sounds a little bit high is because you're using things like Squarespace and WordPress and those types of tools. Then we've got infrastructure as a service. And infrastructure as a service is dominated by storage today. In fact, we're asking organizations, how much do you store online? And they're saying 11%, which is a pretty phenomenal number, I thought. I thought it'd be a little bit lower than that. In fact, that's up quite strongly from last year, which was about 6%. And in fact, in the next 5 years, they're saying it's going to go up to about 24, 25% of their data. Smaller organizations, so as you start to go from large into the mid-market into small, you see this gradual increase in the amount of data that they're storing in cloud services. So smaller organizations store 4 times as much data in cloud services than do larger organizations. Why they're doing it is things like recovery, archiving, and those sorts of things. If we turn our attention to the private cloud, what we need to look at first is the base of virtualization. And over 80% of organizations in large markets, 60% of organizations, well over that, in the mid-market are doing server virtualization. 35 to 40% of their servers already virtualized, a pretty impressive number there. Now, we look at adding on top of that things like chargeback and self-service portal to get into really a private cloud model, because virtualization on its own is not private cloud, so we add self-service portal. When we do that, we see a really fast-growing number, a number that's still kind of more of the purview of larger organizations, but is coming down market very quickly. And we also see that more and bigger servers are shipping into the private cloud to kind of support that. And also in terms of the network, it's getting far more complex, and we're seeing an expanding sort of cloud fabric as organizations are exploring more private cloud.
Okay, now traditionally, voice, data, video, and collaboration solutions have been physically located on business premises. Now, organizations are testing cloud-based solutions for these needs. Mike, why are these changes on the way, and should I really alter the way I think about my network?
Yeah, why are they on the way? Good first question. The concept of, and we've all heard about it, the term's overused, it really is the concept of convergence. And frankly, you shouldn't be thinking about networks. You really should. As I said earlier, the model is being driven by the applications. David's last answer really was all about, my applications, what I'm doing, how I'm storing that data. These are the ways in which the cloud is growing. It really is fundamentally about what is happening over the network, the activity in the network. It's not necessarily the old paradigm, which used to be the growth or how you were using the actual network, the physical topology of the network. So I think that in combination with, convergence in combination with the concept of virtualization, virtualization has provided access, affordable access to a suite, a portfolio of technology today that just wasn't affordable. We bought it piecemeal. We bought the network elements. We somehow found access to the infrastructural elements, the server typically, and then the applications on those servers or on disparate servers. Today, the experience can be affordably, and it can be done affordably, and it can be holistic as well. It can be accomplished individually if you have the wherewithal and the capital to accomplish that in your business, or you can use a service provider, and I should say and/or, because you can use a combination of both. So these are the changes that are taking place that are making cloud a reality today.
Okay, David, what kind of effects can convergence and virtualization have on the network?
Okay, so how long do we have? So really, I mean, you're looking at SLA, impacts on SLA, on security, on architecture, on governance, on what's the expertise in your organization, vendor equipment selection, politics within the organization, right? So all of these different things are impacted by what's going on, right? So if I can spin up and spin down a workload very quickly, what does that mean in terms of the impact overall on the network? If I can move virtual machines around, both within a server itself, within the data center, or out into the public cloud, what does that mean for my network, right? And I would say that governance is one of the things that organizations often overlook. Those other things that I mentioned, super important. But if you don't have good governance around risk, accountability, performance, then the other things, it's really tough to manage. So for example, if I'm a business user and I think, well, I'm just going to go out and fire up an application because I need it for accounting, or I need it for sales, or for marketing, or whatever that need might be, am I allowed to do that, right? What data can I store up in the cloud? And does IT still have control over that? So I think if we have a good governance model in organizations that says, no, actually, if you're going to fire up a cloud service, you have to go through the IT department first. I think that gives us, again, just a starting point for just that one thing. But there's governance across the entire network that organizations should be looking at, plus those myriad other things that I mentioned around SLA, security, architecture, et cetera, et cetera.
Now, it looks like virtualization is becoming the enabling technology for organizations looking to move further into the cloud. With analysts predicting that the hybrid cloud model is the future for most organizations, how will network design change going forward?
Sure. Yeah, I can take a first stab at it, and that's that there's going to be a fair bit of change, and there has been already, right? I mean, as I was saying before, if you have like 12 to 15 VMs on a box, they're interacting with each other in the RAM of that server quite potentially, right? So what's the inspection? What's the security? What's the performance that the network admin can see into what's going on with those VMs? Right, so there's already a challenge there, and you set up some political challenges. Is it a server admin problem or is it a network admin problem? Some mid-market organizations are saying, well, no, I've got one person who does all of that, so it's already their issue. But as you start to scale into large organizations, then you wind up with those different skill sets. Now, there are technologies that allow you to have a virtual switch where you can see, of course, into and tools that allow you to see what's going on from a network admin perspective. So you do have that as a possibility. What I would say as well, though, is that performance becomes a huge issue, right? I mean, if you can move around virtual servers in a data center with great ease, and we're seeing that a lot more organizations using live migration and Hyper-V or using vMotion, whether it's for disaster recovery, planned, unplanned, you've got a lot more activity going on. So the fewer hops you have across the fewer switches, the better, right? So the flatter your network, in essence, which is kind of antithetical to some of the hierarchical type of network topologies we've been looking at, actually might be better in terms of private cloud. And then we can get into the whole public cloud and hybrid cloud and how that's going to change as well. But in any of those cases, you need to be looking at the impact on performance, latency, and loss, inside the organization, and then looking at that from the public cloud perspective as well. And how do I optimize the WAN for being able to communicate? Say, for example, I want to recover a service from a branch office or something like that. Again, that's a cloud application. Mm-hmm. Are you optimized for that?
Right, and I just, if I can jump in there, I think capacity as well is key in terms of network design. The concept of capacity, burstable bandwidth isn't new. Allowing companies to scale up and scale down in terms of the size of the PVC or the access that they have into a network is not new. But making that available in an automated, elastic fashion that cloud, that's really one of the biggest benefits of cloud is the elasticity of resource. Having bandwidth available to an end user in an elastic model is absolutely key. So from a network design perspective, networks are going to be designed fundamentally different to allow customers to really enjoy the full 10 meg or 100 meg or full gig or greater if they're using optical services access into a network or over a network, but they may not always need that. So it has to be able to scale down, to dial down, and the cost as well with it. So I think the capacity issue is fundamentally going to be handled differently in terms of network design. David's point about management, the ability to have access to tools to be able to see what you're using. How much have I used? Because the advantage of cloud is that you pay for what you use. And then from a service provider's perspective, that the customers are paying for what they've used. So that's available today. Those technologies exist, and they will become more pervasive and inherent in the design of network topologies and network services. And probably the final area to consider really that we could talk for ages about is security. The design of the network is going to dictate that security is no longer an afterthought. This idea that a firewall can be layered on top of a network service is a thing of the past. The security of a network has to be inherent to the network, and we can, I think, talk about the technologies that make that happen through firewalls to anti-X, support for content filtering. There's all sorts of things that need to be considered, and they need to be inherent in the network.
Well, is it not true that security is, in fact, probably and usually the #1 concern of any company that's considering, well, a more virtualized hybrid cloud solution? So I'm looking to go in this direction in the future. How should I begin thinking about security and security management around my network?
And a great follow-on comment. I think the first thing you should be thinking about, no one company offers network everywhere. It's probably going to be a combination, depending on the size of your company, but it's going to be a combination of networks. There's the idea of network interconnection. You may use one, you may probably will use multiple network service providers for that network. So what you need to be thinking about from a security perspective first is the concept of interconnection. Is the extensibility of my network safe? How am I connecting across multiple network providers, multiple network types? So if you have more than one provider, that experience needs to be seamless. It needs to be transparent, and it has to be connected in a way that doesn't compromise the packet. We have the ability in the network to see the packet and discriminate against the packet if need be, based on its profile, based on its priority, etc. is number one. So concepts, realities, and technology like IPsec, VPN tunneling allow for, again, different network providers to work together. And then there is a secondary concept as well I want to drill down on. It's different network types, so internet and IPVPN, layer 2 Ethernet service and an MPLS service. How does this all come together? Well, the concept has to rely on, I guess, a comprehensive security framework is how I would characterize it. And I've got the security expert here, David, so maybe you want to jump in.
Yeah, for sure. And I would say that, like you're saying, a lot of the things that you would hold true to in traditional security also kind of follow along into the cloud. What we're looking at as well, though, is things like, kind of as you were saying before, it's how do I balance what data goes where? So, now, some of that's going to be based on peak load. If it peaks only so often, well, maybe that's something you want in the public cloud. If it peaks very infrequently, maybe you want it internally. But that's also going to be determined by the sensitivity of the data, right? And looking at data classification, which I know the industry was talking about that years ago, and organizations still have kind of yet to get there. Even if you do it at a high level and understand these are the applications, these are the workloads where the data is far more sensitive and I need to maybe keep these internal, or at least the cloud providers that I'm going to be using, I'm going to be doing a lot of due diligence with respect to them. So for example, are they SAS 70 compliant? Are they 27002 compliant? Are they PCI compliant? Oh, by the way, when was their last audit, right? If it was a couple of years ago, maybe it doesn't count anymore. So there's a number of things to look at in terms of security, but also, like I was saying before, it's really important to look at sort of breaches that can occur where it's a business user who's signing up for an application and using that when IT hasn't sanctioned that. So IT's done its good governance, and then there's no policy in place to say, okay, business user, you have to go through us first in order to be able to ensure that data isn't being lost from our company that maybe shouldn't be.
And there's the concept, just one final thought on that, where I think is important for the viewers to understand. We've talked a lot about data in transit, right, over the network, and just to think beyond the confines of the pipe for a second, there's the data at rest. And we see that from a consumer perspective, the ability to store in the cloud. And you've cited already, David, this the metrics around storage as a service. Absolutely critical, but what are you going to do with that data when it's at rest? There's a security issue there too. How you contemplate cloud-based storage. What are you willing to actually store in the cloud? Absolutely critical in terms of the overall security strategy. It's not just the inherent security in the network. It's a good place to start, I believe, but it's also with respect to the storage of that data at rest. And you need to think through that carefully. That may be a cloud-based model. It may not be a cloud-based model. It depends on what the company requires.
Okay, sticking with the security issue, and David, we'll turn it back to you. What role does an IPVPN play as an enabler of public cloud business computing services? Yeah,
so I think we touched on some of those issues, right? I mean, to the extent that you can have a pipe that allows you, and it's not just security, right? I mean, so security is a critical component of it, and the extent to which, again, you have a secure tunnel between you and a provider, the better. But it's also important in terms of latency and loss. I mean, the fewer hops the data is taking between you and the provider, the better. I mean, there's things that you can do to kind of test those things out, like ping test, trace route, what have you. But again, you need to be able to be sure that, yes, you have confidentiality in the data, and that's done through ensuring that your providers are using different forms of compliance, again, like I mentioned, PCI compliance, 27002, et cetera. Integrity of the data, that as it's traveling down the pipe, that you don't have a man in the middle or whatever type of attack can possibly happen to that data. But as well, you have availability. And again, that's when we talk about mean time between failure, mean time to repair, and those kinds of things. So again, the more you've got an IPVPN type of solution, then again, you're reducing the risks on availability and then also on confidentiality and integrity.
Thanks, David. Okay, Mike, what's your take then on the future of IPVPNs and public cloud computing?
So just to build on, I think what Dave was just saying, the future of IPVPNs, they provide the flexibility that really, from a network perspective, enables cloud. Cloud enablement requires that internet connections work in conjunction with, as a hybrid model, really, if you will, from a network perspective, internet connections and IPVPN working together. And when I think about it from a mid-market perspective, that's really the epiphany. That's the aha right now for Canadian businesses, is having that internet connection coupled together with that layer 3 MPLS service. That is absolutely vital. You have affordable connectivity into a layer 3 cloud that is just rich with service features, security, capability, class of service, quality of service, reliability, that frankly is not available through the internet today. That's probably the direction of the internet going forward, but I think that IPVPNs really, in combination with the public internet, create that true hybrid cloud enablement experience. So IPVPN is the catalyst from a network perspective to cloud, really to allowing the Canadian businesses to get in and take advantage of infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. Without that coming together of public internet and private IPVPN, it's not going to happen. I think we've been waiting for this.
Well, it's interesting too, because we talk about SLAs with our cloud service providers, and what's their SLA? What's going to be the uptime, performance, those kinds of things. But there is no SLA on the internet, right? I mean, you can't enforce that. So to the degree that you can, again, have your own discrete tunnel, makes a huge difference in terms of being able to at least start to get closer to a guarantee in what that SLA is actually going to look like.
Right. The layer 3 IPVPNs used to be the domain of the large and the very large. And their pervasiveness and the richness of capability in that private cloud historically is now available. It's affordable for a Canadian mid-market sized company. And that is the catalyst behind the cloud from a network perspective.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for clearing things up on a mostly cloudy topic. Sorry. All right, thanks again to David and Mike for joining us and applying your considerable insight and experience to explore the business needs driving the evolution of IP networking. The wave is coming. The first breakers are already here. The question is not if you'll adapt, but when and how you'll adapt. To get the most out of these emerging technologies, it is important to begin planning now to put an IT strategy into place. So take a close look at your organization and where you hope to be in the next 3 to 5 years. Then, think about whether a dynamic IP networking strategy can help get you there more efficiently. Once again, thank you to all our panelists for their invaluable input and expertise. And now, we turn it over to you and any questions you may have.